Beneath the sand you walk on, entire cities sleep underwater. The shorelines we see today are not permanent borders, but shifting grounds that have consumed countless ancient civilizations. This journey uncovers the profound mystery of how rising seas and sinking lands erased entire cultures from human memory. By the end, you will understand the powerful connection between these lost worlds and our own future on a changing planet. We will explore real sunken cities, decode the geological clues they left behind, and ask why so many thriving societies vanished beneath the waves. What forgotten story lies hidden just below the water's surface? The ground you stand on is a fleeting snapshot in a much longer story. Our planet's coastlines are not fixed lines on a map but dynamic, living boundaries, constantly reshaped by immense forces. Deep below the surface, tectonic plates grind and shift, pushing land upwards in some places and causing it to sink in others. This geological dance is set against the rhythm of our climate. For thousands of years, the Earth has cycled between ice ages and warmer periods. During an ice age, colossal glaciers form, locking up vast quantities of water and causing global sea levels to fall. This exposed wide plains of continental shelf, land bridges that animals and early humans could walk across. Then, as the climate warmed, those glaciers melted, returning all that water to the oceans and flooding those same coastal plains. This is not just ancient history. Today, the melting of polar ice and the thermal expansion of warming seawater are pushing sea levels higher once again, while in many regions the land itself is sinking, a process called subsidence. Scientists read this history like a book, extracting long tubes of sediment from the seafloor. These cores contain layers of fossils and minerals, each one a page telling the story of a past shoreline, a past ecosystem. The power of these changes is staggering. A single meter of sea level rise does not just mean the water is 1 meter higher at the beach. It can mean the ocean pushes inland for kilometers, swallowing low-lying cities, farms, and the very ground where history was made. This relentless, restless nature of our planet sets the stage for the greatest disappearances in human history, the civilizations that simply vanished beneath the waves. The legend of a golden city lost to the sea was long considered just a story, yet off the coast of modern Gujarat, the waves conceal a stunning reality. Marine archaeologists working in the Arabian Sea have mapped a sprawling complex of stone structures, some lying under nearly 100 feet of water. They have recovered massive stone anchors, intricately carved pillars, and collections of pottery that have been carbon dated to over 3,500 years ago. This is the sunken city of Dwarka, a place once thought to exist only in sacred hymns. According to ancient Hindu texts, this magnificent capital was the kingdom of Lord Krishna, a city so grand it was protected by towering gates and bustling with trade. The legends say it was consumed by the ocean after Krishna's death, vanishing from sight but not from memory. The pioneering archaeologist Dr. S.R. Rao became a key figure in this discovery, noting that the layout of the submerged ruins, including a series of stone walls and bastions, aligns remarkably with the descriptions found in those ancient texts. This is not merely a sunken settlement. It is a powerful intersection of myth and geology. The city's demise, whether from a sudden subsidence of the land, a powerful earthquake, or the slow, inexorable creep of rising sea levels, was a cataclysm so immense it etched itself into the cultural DNA of a civilization. The story of Dwarka, passed down through countless generations, is a preserved memory of a real geological event. It forces us to reconsider every flood myth, every tale of a sunken land. If one legend holds such a kernel of truth, what other forgotten worlds are waiting in the stories we still tell? This question pulls our gaze from the warm waters of India to a very different, colder sea, where the fate of an entire prehistoric landscape was sealed beneath the waves. The story of a city vanishing into the sea is not unique to the myths of India. Another legend, far more famous, has echoed through Western thought for 2,000 years. The philosopher Plato first wrote of Atlantis, a powerful and advanced island kingdom that fought a war with ancient Athens before sinking catastrophically into the ocean in one terrible day and night. For centuries, this was considered a brilliant work of pure fiction, a moral parable about the dangers of hubris. But what if this story, like the legend of Dwarka, was also rooted in a real geological cataclysm? Some archaeologists and historians point to a specific event in the Mediterranean Sea. Around the year 1600 before the Common Era, the volcanic island of Thera, now known as Santorini, exploded in one of the largest eruptions in human history. The blast was unimaginably powerful, sending tsunamis racing across the sea that would have smashed into the coast of Crete, the heart of the sophisticated Minoan civilization. Geological cores taken from the region show a distinct layer of volcanic ash, a silent witness to this ancient apocalypse. While the entire island of Thera did not sink, vast portions of its coastline and any settlements upon them would have been swallowed by the sea or buried under ash. The Minoans, a vibrant culture known for its elaborate palaces and vibrant art, went into a sudden and irreversible decline. Could the memory of this real disaster, the terrifying sight of the sea engulfing the land, have been passed down through generations, eventually finding its way into Plato's philosophical work? Scholar Dr. Richard Ellis suggests that Atlantis is less a specific place and more a powerful symbol, a story that captures a universal human fear. It is the fear that our entire world, no matter how advanced or powerful, can be erased in an instant by the natural forces that shape our planet. The legend of Atlantis demonstrates how the physical act of a coastline shifting, of the sea reclaiming the land, can transform hard historical fact into enduring myth. It leaves behind only fragments of truth, waiting for us to piece them together. This search for lost worlds submerged by the sea does not end in the warm Mediterranean. A similar mystery lies waiting in the cold, grey waters of the English Channel, where an entire prehistoric landscape named Doggerland awaits its own rediscovery. The cold grey waters of the North Sea hide a secret continent. Just 8,000 years ago, where fishing trawlers now drag their nets, there stretched a vast and fertile plain known to scientists as Doggerland. This was not a narrow land bridge but a sprawling heartland connecting the British Isles to the Netherlands and Denmark. Its landscape was one of rolling hills, dense forests, wetlands teeming with life, and great rivers that carved their way to a distant northern coastline. This was the home of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, people who tracked herds of deer and aurochs, who fished in its rivers and gathered nuts from its woods. They thrived in a land of almost unimaginable abundance. Then the world changed. As the great ice sheets from the last glacial period continued to melt, the sea levels rose relentlessly. This was not a single catastrophic flood, but a slow, inexorable drowning that played out over centuries. The rising waters crept across the low-lying plains, inch by inch, year by year, swallowing forests and flooding river valleys. Around 6,500 years before the Common Era, the final connection between Britain and the continent was severed. The North Sea was born, and Doggerland vanished beneath the waves. For a long time, its existence was just a theory hinted at by strange finds in fishermen's nets. But modern marine archaeology has brought this lost world back into focus. Using seismic survey data originally collected for oil and gas exploration, researchers like Dr. Vince Gaffney have begun to map this submerged landscape in stunning detail. They have identified submerged river valleys, ancient lakes, and even the sunken remains of forests, their tree stumps preserved in the seabed silt. Trawlers have pulled up not just animal bones from mammoths to hyenas, but also finely crafted human tools, barbed points made from antler, and weapons left behind by the people who once called this place home. Dr. Gaffney calls Doggerland a time capsule, a perfectly preserved snapshot of a prehistoric ecosystem and the humans who lived within it, frozen in time at the moment it was inundated. Its fate is a profound lesson. The disappearance of Doggerland was not the end of the world, but it was the end of a world. The people living there were not wiped out. They were displaced, forced to migrate to higher ground, to the lands we now know as Britain and mainland Europe. They took their languages, their knowledge, and their stories with them, becoming the ancestors of new populations. This slow-motion loss of an entire continent shows us that coastal change does not just redraw maps. It erases whole ecosystems, displaces human populations, and rewrites human history, leaving only whispers beneath the sea. And this pattern of a drowned world is not unique to the cold north. Similar, and perhaps even more dramatic, transformations took place in the warm, shallow seas of Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia's tropical islands hold a deeper history than we ever knew. Beneath the warm, shallow waters of the Java and South China Seas lies the ghost of a continent. During the last ice age, a vast landmass known as Sundaland connected what are now the islands of Java, Borneo, and Sumatra to the Asian mainland. This was not a minor land bridge but a true subcontinent, an expanse of lowland forests, river systems, and fertile coastal plains larger than India. It was a thriving world for early human societies, a lush and stable environment where people hunted, foraged, and built communities. Many researchers now believe this sunken world was the very cradle of one of history's most astonishing human migrations, the Great Austronesian Diaspora. As the Ice Age ended and the glaciers melted, the oceans rose with relentless determination. The sea did not simply surround Sundaland, it actively dismantled it, flooding the vast plains and slicing the once unified landmass into the thousands of scattered islands we see on the map today. The coastlines retreated dramatically, swallowing the very ground where generations had lived. This was not a single event but a slow-motion catastrophe that unfolded over centuries, forcing communities to abandon their ancestral homes and move continually inland, or to take to the sea in search of new shores. This great displacement triggered an epic human journey. Pushed by the rising waters, the descendants of the Sundaland people became the world's greatest mariners. They developed sophisticated canoe technology and celestial navigation, eventually spreading outward to populate the most remote corners of the earth. Their descendants today span half the globe, from Madagascar off the coast of Africa all the way to the distant islands of Polynesia. This incredible spread is written in the languages they speak, a vast family of over 1,200 related tongues, and in their DNA, which traces a clear genetic pathway back to those flooded Southeast Asian shores. The echoes of this ancient loss persist in local folklore. Archaeologist Dr. Stephen Oppenheimer points to widespread flood myths across Indonesia and Malaysia that speak of a time when the sea rose and the land was broken apart. These are not vague legends, but potentially the preserved cultural memory of a real geological event, a trauma so profound it shaped the identity of an entire civilization. The story of Sundaland reveals a fundamental truth. Shifting coastlines did not just erase maps, they acted as a powerful engine of human migration, pushing populations into new worlds and forever altering the course of history. This pattern of rising seas driving human movement was not confined to the ancient Old World. An eerily similar drama was unfolding at the very same time, on the opposite side of the planet along the forgotten shores of the Americas. The limestone crust of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula hides a dark and watery world. These are the cenotes, breathtaking natural sinkholes that plunge deep into the earth, revealing vast underwater cave systems. For the ancient Maya, these were not just sources of vital freshwater, they were sacred portals to the underworld, a realm known as Xibalba. But long before they were seen as gateways to the gods, these caves were simply home. During the last ice age, with sea levels far lower than today, these extensive caverns were dry, sheltered environments where early humans lived, lit cooking fires, and performed their first rituals. Then the world warmed, the glaciers melted, and the oceans rose. The rising sea did not just approach the coastline, it seeped inland, silently flooding these underground chambers from below. What was once a place of habitation became a place of preservation, a time capsule sealed by the sea. Underwater archaeologists like Dr. Guillermo de Anda have become explorers of this lost domain. Diving into the pitch-black, fresh water of these cenotes, they have found the remnants of ancient campfires, their charcoal still intact after more than 10,000 years. They have recovered pottery, tools, and the skeletal remains of both animals and humans, all perfectly preserved in the cool, still water. These are not random items dropped into a well. They are the direct evidence of life left behind when these caves were dry land. The discoveries reveal a profound continuity. The Maya ancestors who lived in these caves experienced the slow, inexorable creep of the water. They watched as their former shelters, their sacred spaces, were gradually reclaimed by the rising water table. This geological trauma, the literal encroachment of the underworld into the human world, became woven into the very fabric of their belief system. The Maya did not just fear the cenotes, they revered them, seeing them as the home of powerful deities and the source of life-giving rain. Their entire cosmology, with its powerful water gods and stories of great floods, can be seen as a cultural memory of this real environmental event. The cenotes show us that a shifting coastline is not just a horizontal line moving inland. It is a vertical force that can flood the very foundations of a culture, turning practical shelters into mythological realms and leaving a legacy of belief that lasts for millennia. A powerful Greek city vanished in a single night. Helike, a prominent member of the Achaean League and a vibrant center of trade and worship, was utterly erased in the year 373 before the Common Era. According to the ancient traveler Pausanias, who wrote about the event centuries later, the city's destruction was so complete it was attributed to the wrath of the god Poseidon. The story told of a massive earthquake, followed by a colossal wave from the Gulf of Corinth that swallowed the city whole, dragging every building and every citizen down into the sea. For centuries, this account was treated as a dramatic legend, a moral fable about angering the gods, but the truth, as we now know, was both more terrifying and more scientific. The entire coastline there is a seismically active zone where the Earth's plates constantly grind against one another. On that fateful night, a powerful quake likely triggered a phenomenon called liquefaction, where water-saturated soil temporarily loses its strength and behaves like a liquid. The ground beneath Helike simply turned to soup, and as it sank, the sea rushed in to claim it. The city did not just flood, it was submerged, buried under layers of sediment and forgotten. For nearly 2,000 years, its exact location remained one of Greece's great mysteries. Then, in the 1990s, a dedicated team of archaeologists, combining clues from ancient texts with modern geological surveys, made a stunning discovery. They found the ruins of Helike not deep under the sea, but buried beneath the coastal plain, hidden under layers of silt and gravel deposited by the tsunami. They uncovered the remains of walls, pottery, and even the shells of oysters that had attached themselves to submerged structures. This was the physical proof that the legend was real. As geologist Dr. Stephen Soder explains, Helike stands as a stark cautionary tale. It demonstrates with brutal clarity how coastal settlements, no matter how powerful or prosperous, exist in a fragile balance with the forces of the planet. A single, rapid geological event, a sudden shift in the shoreline, can wipe a civilization from the map and nearly from human memory. This story of a sudden, violent end forces us to consider the opposite end of the spectrum. What happens when the sea does not strike in a single night, but advances with a slow, patient, and unstoppable persistence over centuries? The same slow drowning that consumed Doggerland was playing out in another crucial cradle of civilization. The Persian Gulf, a shallow sea vital to the modern world's economy, was once a very different place. During the last ice age, its seafloor was a vast, fertile plain, watered by the Tigris, Euphrates, and Karun rivers, which converged into a single mighty waterway known as the Gulf River. This lush valley was an oasis, a green corridor that attracted early human settlements. As the world warmed and sea levels rose, this entire plain was gradually flooded, a process that only stabilized around 4,000 years ago. It was along these newly formed, shifting shores that some of the world's first great trading ports emerged. Civilizations like Dilmun and Magan became legendary names in ancient texts, the vital middlemen in a network that connected the mighty empires of Mesopotamia with the sophisticated cities of the distant Indus Valley. These ports were not just docks and warehouses, they were cosmopolitan hubs where copper, pearls, ivory, and exotic woods were exchanged, fueling the growth of the world's first urban societies. Then the water kept rising. The very sea that brought them wealth began to steal their land. The relentless creep of the shoreline inundated their harbors, swallowed their low-lying settlements, and salted their freshwater sources. Maritime trade routes that had functioned for centuries were suddenly disrupted as familiar coastlines vanished and safe anchorages became treacherous shallows. This was not a single catastrophic event, but a slow-moving economic collapse triggered by the environment. The decline of these crucial ports had a domino effect. Mesopotamia, which relied on this maritime network for vital resources and commerce, was suddenly cut off. Historians now see the drowning of the Persian Gulf ports as a key factor in the wider societal fragmentation and decline that affected the entire region around 4,000 years ago. The evidence for this lost world is now being pulled from the seabed. Underwater archaeologists have mapped the outlines of submerged settlements and located ancient oyster beds that were once farmed by these coastal peoples. They have recovered distinctive pottery and the remains of ancient shipwrecks, silent testimony to a vibrant maritime culture that was ultimately lost to the waves. This physical evidence connects directly to some of humanity's oldest stories. Historian Dr. Joris Zarins has proposed a compelling theory that this real, collective memory of the Persian Gulf's great flooding was the genesis for the epic flood narratives that appear in Mesopotamian literature, most famously in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In that ancient poem, the gods decide to destroy humanity with a great flood, a story that would later be echoed in the biblical tale of Noah. The people living in Mesopotamia would have witnessed the sea relentlessly claiming the land, swallowing entire cities they once traded with. Is it any wonder that this profound geological trauma would become woven into their deepest myths, a story of a world wiped clean by water? The fate of Dilmun and Magan is a stark lesson in economic fragility. It shows that a shifting coastline does not just erase history, it can sever the trade routes that sustain empires, proving that our economic centers are just as vulnerable to the sea as our homes. This ancient link between environmental change and imperial collapse finds a powerful echo thousands of years later in the mysterious downfall of a Roman-era metropolis known as the Venice of the West. The Minoan civilization was the first great maritime power of Europe. On the island of Crete, they built vast, labyrinthine palace complexes without defensive walls, a testament to their confidence and their dominion over the sea. Their vibrant art depicts graceful athletes leaping over bulls and elegant processions, a culture at the peak of its sophistication. Then, around the year 1600 before the Common Era, their world came to an end. The catalyst was the volcanic island of Thera, under 100 kilometers to the north. Its eruption was apocalyptic, one of the most violent in the last 10,000 years. The center of the island collapsed into a vast, empty magma chamber, creating the dramatic caldera we see at Santorini today. This colossal collapse generated tsunamis of almost unimaginable force. Waves estimated to be over 30 meters high would have raced across the sea, slamming into the northern coast of Crete with the power of a planetary hammer. Minoan harbor towns, their fleets of trading ships, and coastal palaces were simply scoured from the map. The destruction did not stop with the waves. The sky darkened as a torrent of volcanic ash and pumice rained down, blanketing eastern Crete in a thick, suffocating layer. As volcanologist Dr. Floyd McCoy explains, this ashfall would have poisoned the soil, making agriculture impossible for years. It would have collapsed roofs, contaminated freshwater supplies, and thrown the entire Minoan economy into chaos. The eruption also injected vast amounts of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, potentially triggering a volcanic winter that disrupted climate patterns across the globe for years, further crippling their trade-based society. The Minoans did not vanish overnight, but their power was broken. Weakened and impoverished, they became vulnerable, and within a few generations, their culture was eclipsed by mainland powers like the Mycenaeans. The most haunting evidence of their final moments comes not from Crete, but from Thera itself. At the site of Akrotiri, archaeologists have uncovered a Minoan-style town frozen in time, much like Pompeii. Here, there are no skeletons of people trapped in the act of fleeing. The buildings are intact, their beautiful frescoes still gracing the walls. This suggests the population had enough warning to evacuate before the final, cataclysmic eruption buried everything under meters of ash. Akrotiri is a perfect snapshot, a city preserved at the very peak of its beauty, a silent witness to the civilization that was about to lose everything. Dr. McCoy also points out that the eruption itself physically reshaped the coastline. The collapse of the caldera permanently altered local sea levels, while the tsunamis and subsequent erosion erased harbors and swept entire settlements off the map, literally changing the face of the land the Minoans had known. Their story is a dramatic lesson in abrupt, violent change, where the very geology of the planet can turn against a civilization. But while volcanoes can erase a world in a day, the ocean often works with a slower, more patient kind of power, as seen in the vast, submerged landscapes of the Pacific. The immense continent of Sahul, a lost world connecting Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania, was once a sprawling landscape of deserts, rainforests, and vast coastal plains. For tens of thousands of years, this was the home of the world's oldest continuous cultures, with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples thriving across its expanse. But as the last ice age waned, the rising seas began a patient, millennia-long assault on this continent. The ocean did not simply flood the edges, it actively dismantled the land, slicing through the plains that connected New Guinea to Australia and drowning the bridge to Tasmania. An area of land larger than the modern United Kingdom was gradually swallowed by the waves, transforming a single continent into the fractured archipelago of islands we recognize on today's map. This was not a sudden catastrophe, but a slow, inexorable transformation that played out over hundreds of human generations. The people living on those coastal plains witnessed a profound change, watching the sea claim their familiar hunting grounds, sacred sites, and freshwater sources, forcing a continual retreat inland. This long, slow retreat has left its mark not in dramatic legends of a single flood, but in the deep cultural memory of sea country that is central to many indigenous Australian groups today. The stories and songlines speak of a time when the sea was far away and the land extended much further out, a memory preserved across thousands of years. The physical proof of this lost world is now emerging from the seabed. Off the coast of northwestern Australia, underwater archaeologists have discovered ancient stone tools, sharpened cutting implements, and ancient shell-midden piles of discarded seafood meals lying on the ocean floor far from any modern shore. These are not items washed out to sea, but the direct evidence of human activity on land that is now submerged. Archaeologist Dr. Sean Ulm describes these sites as cultural time capsules, holding the keys to understanding the very first chapters of human settlement on the continent. They force us to reconsider the entire narrative of how people moved across and adapted to this ancient land, revealing a much richer and more complex coastal history than we ever knew from sites on the present-day shoreline. The story of Sahul's drowning reveals a different kind of cataclysm. Unlike the sudden volcanic fury that shattered the Minoan world or the overnight tsunami that consumed Helike, this was a change so gradual it was almost imperceptible within a single lifetime. Yet, over centuries, its impact was just as total. This gradual transformation isolated populations, allowing for the incredible cultural and linguistic diversity we see in the region today. It forced innovations in technology and social organization as people adapted to shrinking territories and new island environments. The fate of Sahul presents us with a crucial question, one that echoes into our own future. Is a civilization more threatened by a sudden, violent disaster, or by a slow, relentless change that gives the illusion of normalcy even as the world is fundamentally reshaped? A single, catastrophic flood may echo through thousands of years of storytelling. Around 7,600 years ago, the Black Sea was a very different place, a vast freshwater lake lying hundreds of feet below the level of the world's oceans. Its shores were fertile ground for some of Europe's earliest farming communities, people who built their lives around this immense inland body of water. Then the planet's rising seas reached a tipping point. The Mediterranean, swollen with meltwater, finally overtopped the natural earthen dam that was the Bosphorus Strait. What began as a trickle soon became a thunderous, unstoppable torrent. Geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman have proposed that the saltwater rushed in with the force of 200 Niagara Falls, a roaring cascade that carved a deep new channel and poured into the low-lying basin. The lake rose violently, its shoreline surging outward by more than a mile each day. In less than a year, the freshwater sea was gone, replaced by a rising, salty ocean that swallowed an area of land the size of Ireland. Any settlements along the old shoreline would have been utterly erased, their inhabitants forced into a frantic, permanent retreat. This event, known as the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis, is one of the most dramatic proposals in geology. Could this have been the real-world catastrophe behind the Great Flood myth of Noah, a story that appears in the Bible and has parallels in countless other cultures? Underwater surveys seem to support the theory. Sonar scans of the Black Sea floor have revealed a submerged ancient coastline, complete with river valleys and waterfalls that are now far beneath the salt water. In deeper, oxygen-poor areas, explorers have found the remains of wooden structures, tools, and even a preserved shipwreck, all hinting at human activity from a time when this was dry, habitable land. Yet the debate among scientists is far from settled. Some researchers argue the flooding was a much slower, more gradual process, questioning the catastrophic timeline. Whether it was a single, terrifying year or a relentless century, the outcome was the same. The people living around that ancient lake were displaced on a massive scale. Ryan and Pittman suggest these refugees did not just vanish. They carried their knowledge, their stories, and their advanced farming techniques with them as they fled inland, up the river valleys of southeastern Europe. This great exodus, triggered by the invading sea, may have been the catalyst that spread agriculture across the continent, fundamentally reshaping the demographic and cultural landscape of prehistoric Europe. The story of the Black Sea, whether a sudden cataclysm or a slow drowning, demonstrates a profound pattern. A single geological event along a coastline does not just destroy. It scatters people and their ideas, erasing one world while giving birth to another. This deep, recurring human experience of losing land to the water does more than just force migration. It sinks into our very souls, shaping how we see the world and our place within it, giving rise to powerful spiritual beliefs that attempt to explain the awesome power of the sea. The silent ruins on the ocean floor cannot speak for themselves, so scientists have become their interpreters. To uncover these drowned worlds, researchers deploy an arsenal of technology that acts as a second sight, revealing what the deep has kept hidden. Sonar mapping sends pulses of sound through the water, painting a detailed picture of the seabed. This is how we find the ghostly outlines of sunken river valleys, the foundations of ancient walls, and the distinct shapes of human-made structures lying in the abyss. From above, satellites use radar to detect subtle variations in sea surface height, which can betray the presence of buried ruins influencing the water above them. These tools create the maps of lost landscapes, showing us where to look. But to understand when these places were alive, we need to dive into time itself. That is where sediment coring comes in. A hollow tube is driven deep into the seabed, pulling up a long cylinder of mud and sand. Each layer is a page in a history book, preserving pollen, microscopic fossils, and even particles of charcoal from ancient campfires. By applying radiocarbon dating to organic material like a piece of wood or a seashell, scientists can pinpoint the exact moment that layer was formed, locking in a date for the catastrophe that buried it. For wooden artifacts, dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, offers an even more precise calendar. Each ring pattern is unique, like a fingerprint for a specific year, allowing archaeologists to match a timber from a sunken village to a known sequence of drought and rainfall, sometimes nailing down the year it was cut. Beyond dates, we can learn how these lost people lived. Isotopic analysis of bones and teeth acts as a chemical diary of a person's life. The isotopes in the water they drank and the food they ate leave a distinct signature in their remains, telling us whether their diet was based on fish or farmed grains, and even revealing if they migrated from a different region during their lifetime. To physically recover these stories from the deep, marine archaeologists use remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs. These robotic submersibles, connected to a ship by a long cable, are the eyes and hands in the crushing darkness. They can hover over a fragile artifact, use delicate manipulator arms to retrieve a pottery shard, and send live video from a site without a human diver ever disturbing the delicate environment. Pioneers like Dr. Robert Ballard, famed for locating the wreck of the Titanic, have turned this technology toward ancient history. His team has explored the Black Sea's anoxic depths, where water without oxygen preserves wooden shipwrecks for thousands of years, their masts and cargoes looking as if they sank only yesterday. Each of these tools transforms whispered legends into shouted facts. A strange shape on a sonar readout becomes a flooded settlement. A chemical signature in a bone becomes the story of a coastal people adapting to a changing world. This technological bridge across time allows us to measure the true cost of a shifting shoreline, not just in lost land, but in lost culture, lost knowledge, and shattered communities. This evidence forces a difficult and urgent question about our own world, a world where the seas are once again on the move. Our planet breathes to a rhythm we can barely perceive. Earth's position in space is not fixed, but wobbles and shifts over vast cycles of time that stretch for tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years. These are the Milankovitch cycles, subtle changes in our planet's orbit and tilt that act as a master clock for the ice ages. When the cycles align to reduce the sun's warmth reaching the northern hemisphere, ice sheets grow, locking away ocean water and dropping sea levels dramatically. When the cycles shift back, the planet warms, the ice melts, and the oceans swell, reclaiming the continents. This is the great pulse of the Earth, a heartbeat measured in the rise and fall of shorelines over millennia. The scale of this change is almost beyond comprehension. At the peak of the last ice age, so much water was frozen on land that global sea levels were over 120 meters lower than they are today. Then, as the Great Thaw began, the oceans rose at a rate of over a centimeter per year, a relentless force that would have been terrifyingly obvious to any human living on a vulnerable coast. Paleoclimatologists are the detectives of these ancient climates. They drill deep into the ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica, extracting cores that contain tiny bubbles of the ancient atmosphere, a direct sample of the air from thousands of years ago. They pull sediment cores from the ocean floor, reading the layers of microscopic fossils and minerals that tell the story of past temperatures and ice volumes. This data paints a clear picture, a planet constantly in flux. Even in more recent history, smaller climate shifts had dramatic consequences. The medieval warm period, a time of unusually mild temperatures from around the year 900 to 1250, saw glaciers retreat and sea levels creep upward. This very change may have sealed the fate of the Norse Vikings in Greenland. Their eastern settlement, established during a warmer era, found itself struggling as the climate eventually cooled again into the Little Ice Age. But the initial warm period itself may have altered coastal ecosystems and sea ice patterns, disrupting the marine resources they depended on long before the cold became the main threat. Understanding these deep, natural cycles is crucial, for it provides the long view of our current predicament. The sea level rise we are witnessing today is not unprecedented in the planet's history, but the cause and the speed most certainly are. For the first time, the primary driver is not a slow celestial wobble, but the rapid injection of greenhouse gases from human industry. We have taken a natural process and put it on fast forward, compressing changes that once unfolded over centuries into mere decades. This historical perspective is humbling, yet also clarifying. It tells us that coastal change is an ancient adversary, one that has tested human societies for as long as we have existed. The real question is not whether the environment will change, but how we will choose to respond. This forces us to look back at those lost civilizations with new urgency, to see their stories not as forgotten tragedies, but as a library of survival strategies, a collection of choices made when the water began to rise. A legend is not always a fiction. It is sometimes a memory that has outlived the people who witnessed it. For thousands of years, long before the invention of writing, human societies preserved their history through oral tradition, passing stories from one generation to the next with meticulous care. These are not simple folk tales, but complex narratives that often encode real, cataclysmic events. Across the globe, from the Dreamtime stories of Aboriginal Australians that speak of a time when the sea was far away, to the detailed flood myths in Mesopotamian and Native American lore, we find a common thread, a shared trauma of rising water. These stories are more than just cultural artifacts. They are historical records written not on clay or paper, but on the human mind. Anthropologist Dr. Patrick Nunn has dedicated his work to decoding these ancient memories, particularly in the Pacific Islands. He found that oral histories from places like Fiji and Vanuatu describe with startling accuracy the locations of islands that sank beneath the waves centuries ago, events corroborated by geological data. One story from the Solomon Islands tells of a volcanic eruption that caused a nearby island to tilt and sink, a description that aligns perfectly with the geological phenomenon of tectonic subsidence. How could a people recall an event that happened 500, even 800 years in the past, unless the story was a faithful heirloom passed down from the very survivors? This is where science and story perform a powerful dance. By cross-referencing the details of a myth, the description of a coastline that was once different, with core samples and underwater topography, researchers can pinpoint real events that shaped human destiny. The Great Flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh, for instance, gains a new layer of meaning when viewed alongside the evidence of the Persian Gulf's inundation. These narratives become a bridge, allowing us to see a geological event not just as a layer of sediment, but through the eyes of the people who lived through it, who felt the terror of the advancing sea and the profound loss of their homeland. This interplay between myth and data reveals a profound truth that shifting coastlines did more than just redraw maps. They carved deep scars into human consciousness, creating stories that would endure for millennia. The emotional weight of these lost worlds, however, was not only carried in spoken words, it was also given form in the art and objects they left behind. The silent ruins of these lost worlds are not just legends, they are physical places you could swim through today. Off the coast of Italy, beneath the clear waters of the Bay of Naples, lie the stunning remains of Baiae. This was the Las Vegas of the Roman elite, a luxurious resort town famed for its healing hot springs and decadent villas. But the same volcanic forces that fed its baths also caused the land to sink, slowly submerging the city over centuries. Now, marble statues of gods and emperors stand guard on the seafloor, their faces turned towards the sunlit surface, while the mosaic floors of grand courtyards are navigated by fish instead of senators. This is not a city destroyed by a single cataclysm, but one gradually reclaimed, offering a poignant, almost peaceful glimpse into a vanished world of luxury. For a much older story, we can travel to the coast of Laconia in Greece, to the site of Pavloptri. This is the oldest submerged city ever found, a bustling Bronze Age port that thrived over 5,000 years ago. Its complete street plan is still visible from above, a grid of stone foundations, courtyards, and tombs that sank due to a combination of earthquakes and rising seas. The preservation is so remarkable that archaeologists have mapped out two-story buildings and can trace the routes of ancient cart traffic. This is not a collection of scattered ruins, but a complete urban snapshot, a time capsule of daily life from an era we once knew only from fragments. The real story of these places is told through the objects left behind. A pottery jug recovered from a sunken merchant ship tells a tale of long-distance trade, its shape and clay composition revealing it was made in a workshop hundreds of miles away. A piece of gold jewelry lost in the panic of a fleeing family speaks to the wealth and artistry of its owners. Simple stone tools and fishing weights found on a submerged shoreline give voice to the common people, their daily struggles, and their intimate connection to a coast that is no longer there. Each artifact is a single word in a sentence, and when pieced together, they form the narrative of an entire culture. Uncovering this history required a revolution in archaeological methods. Pioneers like Dr. George Bass literally invented the science of underwater excavation. He realized that digging on the seabed was no different from digging on land. It required the same meticulous care, the same need to record the exact position of every find. He and his team developed techniques for creating underwater grids, for using airlifts to carefully remove sediment, and for photographing and mapping sites while suspended in the blue void. This systematic approach transformed shipwrecks and sunken cities from treasure troves into historical documents, where the context of a discovery is as important as the object itself. The ocean floor is, in truth, the greatest museum on Earth, its galleries vast and its collections priceless. Yet these sites are incredibly fragile, threatened by erosion, pollution, and the destructive drag of fishing nets. The very act of discovering them can put them at risk, making preservation a race against time. Each submerged city we protect is a library we save from being burned, holding answers not only about our past but also about the enduring human relationship with a changing planet. What other chapters of our shared history are still waiting, perfectly preserved in the silent, sunken dark? The same rising seas that erased human settlements also rewrote the book of life. When coastlines shift, they do not simply redraw a line on a map, they completely reorganize the living world. Lush coastal forests and fertile plains become submerged, transforming into entirely new marine habitats. The creatures that once lived there are faced with a brutal choice: adapt to a new reality, migrate to follow the retreating shoreline, or perish. The flooding of Doggerland is a perfect example. That vast, fertile plain was a thriving ecosystem, home to mammoths, giant deer, and the humans who hunted them. When it became the North Sea, it created a new, shallow marine environment that eventually became one of the world's most productive fishing grounds. But for the people living through that change, it was a catastrophe. The terrestrial game they relied upon vanished, replaced by fish stocks in a newly formed sea that required entirely new technologies and knowledge to harvest. This ecological upheaval forced a fundamental shift in human survival strategies. As productive coastal lands were swallowed, human populations were pushed inward into territories already occupied by other groups. These mass migrations were not peaceful strolls into empty land. They were desperate movements that drove cultural exchange, the sharing of new technologies, but also fierce competition and conflict over dwindling resources. The genetic legacy of these ancient displacements is still written in our DNA. In Southeast Asia, after the drowning of Sundaland fragmented the landscape, researchers have found a dramatic increase in genes that provide resistance to malaria. Why would this happen? As populations were forced into new, densely forested inland areas, they encountered new strains of the disease. Those with a natural genetic resistance were more likely to survive and pass on their genes, creating a lasting biological imprint from a geological event. This deep connection between a changing coastline and human evolution is profound. Ecologist Dr. Sandra Knapp emphasizes that these past events are not just history, they are lessons. By studying how ecosystems collapsed and reorganized when coastlines shifted in the past, we can better predict and manage the immense biodiversity crisis facing our coastal zones today. The loss of a shoreline is never just the loss of land. It is the unraveling of a complex web of life, a web that humanity has always been a part of and whose fate is inextricably linked to our own. The water is coming for us now, the same relentless force that swallowed Doggerland and shattered the Minoan world is lapping at the foundations of our own cities. From the Art Deco streets of Miami, where rising saltwater bleeds up through the storm drains, to the sprawling megacity of Mumbai, where monsoon floods grow more catastrophic each year, the pattern is terrifyingly familiar. We are living through the opening chapters of a story our ancestors would recognize all too well. The ancient Viking settlements on the coast of Greenland offer a stark lesson in this kind of slow-motion collapse. Established during the medieval warm period, these Norse communities thrived for centuries, building stone churches and farming pastures that stretched to the fjords. But as the climate shifted into the Little Ice Age, their world shrank. The growing sea ice cut off vital trade routes to Europe, while shorter, cooler summers made it impossible to grow enough fodder to sustain their cattle. They were not wiped out by a single disaster, but slowly strangled by a changing environment they failed to adapt to. Their story is a powerful warning. It shows that societal collapse is rarely a sudden explosion. It is more often a gradual unraveling, a series of bad harvests, lost connections, and forced retreats that ultimately leads to silence. Today, urban planners and historians are forming an unprecedented alliance, using these ancient case studies to design the cities of the future. They are not just building higher seawalls. They are advocating for resilient infrastructure that works with nature, not against it, such as restoring coastal wetlands to act as natural storm buffers. They are also championing the difficult concept of managed retreat, the deliberate, organized movement of people and infrastructure away from vulnerable coastlines. This is not a sign of defeat, but a strategy of wisdom, learning from the drowned cities of the past to avoid repeating their fate. The scale of the challenge is immense. According to the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, hundreds of millions of people living in coastal communities could be displaced by sea level rise within this century. The geological processes that once played out over millennia are now compressed into decades. This acceleration makes the study of past inundations not an academic exercise, but an urgent necessity. By examining how ancient societies coped or failed to cope, we gain a crucial playbook for our own survival. Their stories force us to ask profound questions about what we value. Do we pour endless resources into defending concrete and steel, or do we begin the careful, compassionate work of moving our heritage, our communities, and our memories to higher ground? The ghosts of sunken cities are no longer just silent ruins. They have become our most urgent teachers. Every artifact pulled from the seabed carries the weight of a human story. The pursuit of these lost worlds is not a simple treasure hunt. It is a delicate exercise in ethics, a field fraught with difficult questions about who owns the past. When archaeologists descend into a sunken city, they are not entering an abandoned ruin. They are stepping into a place that was once someone's home, a community's sacred ground, or the final resting place for its people. The thrill of discovery must be balanced against the profound responsibility of preservation. International frameworks like the UNESCO Convention on the Protection of the Underwater Cultural Heritage provide a crucial set of rules, establishing that this shared history belongs to all of humanity, not to the first person who can haul it to the surface. This convention actively discourages commercial exploitation and looting, mandating that underwater sites are preserved in place whenever possible. and that any excavation is conducted to the highest scientific standards. It is a global effort to prevent the past from being stripped and sold piece by piece, losing its context and its story forever. But beyond international law, there is a deeper, more personal layer of ethics. In Australia, marine archaeologists working on submerged Aboriginal sites do not simply arrive with their diving gear and begin digging. They engage in extensive, respectful collaboration with the traditional owners of the land. They seek permission, they listen to elders, and they incorporate indigenous knowledge into their research plans. For these communities, a submerged landscape is not a dead site. It is a living part of their cultural identity, their sea country. Disturbing it without consent is not just bad science, it is a profound cultural violation. This collaborative model, built on mutual respect, ensures that new knowledge benefits everyone while honoring the spiritual connection of those for whom the past is still very much alive. This leads to a central tension in the field, a debate with no easy answer. Should we leave these fragile sites completely untouched, allowing them to rest in peace on the ocean floor, or do we have a duty to rescue them? Coastal erosion, pollution, and the destructive drag of fishing nets are actively destroying these underwater time capsules. Some argue that careful, documented excavation is the only way to save the information they hold before it is lost forever. Ethicist Dr. Felipe Castro offers a guiding principle that our work must balance the relentless drive of scientific inquiry with deep cultural sensitivity. He argues that we are not just recovering objects, we are handling memories. A submerged tomb is not merely a day to point on burial practices, it is a sacred space. A sunken village is not just a collection of foundations, it is the physical remnant of a community's life. Every decision to touch the past must be weighed against the duty to honor those who lived it. These ethical considerations transform underwater archaeology from a technical discipline into a deeply human one. It forces us to remember that the silent ruins below are not just clues to a mystery, they are a legacy, and we are their temporary guardians. This responsibility extends beyond the water's edge, connecting directly to the choices we are making today about our own vulnerable coasts and the legacy we will leave for those who come after us. The ocean floor is no longer a blank space on the map. We are now witnessing a golden age of underwater discovery, powered by a new generation of robotic explorers and digital eyes. Autonomous underwater vehicles, or a UVS, glide silently through the deep, programmed to map vast swaths of the seabed for days on end without human intervention. They are tireless cartographers of the lost. Above them, aircraft equipped with LIDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, fire millions of laser pulses at the water's surface. In shallow coastal areas, these lasers can penetrate the water, bouncing off the seafloor to create stunningly detailed three-dimensional maps of submerged landscapes. This very technology was used to reveal the true extent of ancient Mayan settlements along the coast of Belize, showing how their cities adapted to a complex network of canals and waterways that are now hidden beneath the waves. The revolution does not stop with mapping. We can now search for the ghosts of ancient people without ever lifting a trowel. Scientists have developed a technique to extract trace amounts of ancient DNA from seafloor sediments. A single core sample of mud can contain genetic fragments from the humans who lived there, the animals they herded, and the plants they cultivated. This is like reading an invisible library, allowing researchers to detect human presence and even major shifts in agricultural practices, all without disturbing a single physical artifact. Private companies are now entering this field with powerful new tools. Firms like Ocean Infinity operate fleets of advanced robotic vehicles that can work in concert, scouring the deepest and most remote parts of the ocean. This makes exploration dramatically cheaper and safer, opening up previously inaccessible frontiers to scientific inquiry. The pace of discovery is accelerating at a breathtaking rate. What once took a lifetime of diving and guesswork can now be achieved in a single survey season. Each new technological leap brings us closer to a complete picture of humanity's long and intimate relationship with the shore, a relationship that has always been defined by change. But as we uncover these ancient stories of loss and adaptation, a pressing question emerges for our own time. How will the choices we make today be remembered by the generations who will one day explore the ruins of our world? The silent dread of a drowning world echoes far beyond the scientific journal. It resonates deeply in the stories we tell and the images we create. From the grand fantasy of J.R.R. Tolkien to the chilling horror of H.P. Lovecraft, our collective imagination is haunted by sunken cities. Tolkien's great island kingdom of Numenor was a pinnacle of human achievement, a place of immense knowledge and power. Yet, as punishment for its pride and its attempt to seize the land of the gods, it was swallowed by the sea in a cataclysmic downfall. The story is a clear allegory for Atlantis, but its power lies in its emotional truth, the terrifying vision of a whole civilization with all its people and palaces vanishing beneath an unforgiving ocean. In a very different genre, Lovecraft populated his mythos with sunken, cyclopean cities like Archaeology, where the dread entity Cthulhu sleeps. These are not places of lost glory, but of ancient, incomprehensible horror, reflecting a fear of the deep and what it might one day give back. These literary creations are not mere escapism. They are a way for us to process a deep-seated, ancestral anxiety about the instability of our world. Scholar Dr. Margaret Cohen describes this as a form of cultural memory, where maritime literature encodes the real, historical trauma of coastal disasters. The countless paintings and films depicting apocalyptic floods or the ghostly beauty of underwater ruins serve a similar purpose. They give a face to our abstract fears about environmental change and the fragility of our own cities. When we see a painting of a tidal wave engulfing a metropolis, or watch a film about explorers discovering a lost city under the sea, we are not just being entertained. We are engaging in a collective ritual, rehearsing a potential future by examining the ghosts of the past. This artistic expression builds a vital bridge. It connects the cold, hard data of sediment cores and sonar maps to the warm, beating heart of human emotion. Through art and story, the geological concept of sea level rise transforms into a palpable sense of loss and wonder. We do not just understand that Doggerland sank, we can feel the tragedy of a hunter watching his forest drown. We do not just know the Minoans declined, we can share the terror of a priestess seeing the sea turn black with ash. This creative legacy ensures that the lessons of these lost shorelines are not forgotten as dry history, but are lived and felt by every new generation, reminding us that the line between land and water has always been the most dramatic frontier of the human experience. A civilization's wealth often begins at the water's edge. For the great cities of the ancient Indus Valley, their entire economic engine was built upon a delicate and shifting coastline. These were not just cities, they were hubs of a vast trading network, their seals and pottery found as far away as Mesopotamia. Their prosperity depended on the predictable flow of rivers like the Indus and the Gagahakra, which deposited rich silt across vast deltas, creating fertile farmland to feed a growing urban population. But when the shorelines began to change, when sea levels rose and rivers shifted their courses or silted up, that entire economic foundation crumbled. The ports that connected them to the world became landlocked or were submerged. The agricultural lands that fed them were either drowned by saltwater or starved of nutrient-rich sediment. This was not a sudden invasion, but a slow economic strangulation. The result was famine, a breakdown in long-distance trade, and ultimately, a mass migration away from the grand, meticulously planned cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. A similar story of economic unraveling unfolded centuries later with the Khmer Empire in Southeast Asia. Their magnificent capital, Angkor, was supported by a complex hydraulic system of canals and reservoirs designed to capture water for rice cultivation. This system relied on a specific, stable monsoon pattern, but as climate shifts altered rainfall and possibly as rising seas impacted the vast Mekong Delta to the south, this intricate water management network faltered. The economic base of the empire, its agricultural surplus, collapsed. Without that surplus, they could not sustain the army, the bureaucracy, or the grand temple-building projects that defined their power. The empire did not fall to a conqueror's army. It simply faded away as its economic lifeblood was drained by environmental change. This pattern is what historian Dr. Joseph Tainter warns us about. He observes that as societies become more complex, they often overshoot their resource base, building an elaborate economic structure that is incredibly fragile. When an environmental shock arrives, whether a shifting river or a rising sea, the entire system has no resilience left. It cannot adapt and it fractures. The parallel to our own world is impossible to ignore. Modern coastal economies are just as vulnerable, if not more so. Think of the global fishing industry, a primary protein source for billions, threatened by ocean acidification and the loss of coastal nurseries for fish. Consider the trillions of dollars in real estate and infrastructure lining the world's beaches, all of it at risk from erosion and storm surges intensified by sea level rise. And what of the tourism industry in places like Florida, the Caribbean, or Southeast Asia, where the very attraction, the coastline, is literally washing away? The economic collapse of an ancient city is not just a historical curiosity, it is a blueprint for a potential future. It forces us to ask whether our own complex global economy, so deeply intertwined with the coast, has the flexibility to bend without breaking when the shorelines once again decide to move. This sense of loss for a land that no longer exists is a powerful psychological force, a ghost limb of the collective soul. When an entire coastline vanishes, taking with it the villages, sacred groves, and burial grounds of a people, it does more than displace a population. It severs a fundamental connection to ancestry and place, creating a deep, intergenerational wound. Psychologists who study collective trauma observe that communities with oral histories of sunken homelands, from the Pacific Islands to the fjords of Scandinavia, often carry a profound, almost genetic, sense of nostalgia for a world they have never seen with their own eyes. This is not a simple longing for the past. It is a form of cultural identity dislocation where the very ground of being has been physically erased, leaving stories as the only anchor. These narratives of loss are not just passive memories, they are active tools for resilience. By repeating the stories of the Great Flood, of the ancestors who fled the rising water, a community reaffirms its survival. It transforms a historical catastrophe into a foundational epic, a testament to their endurance. This process embeds the geological event so deeply into the cultural fabric that it becomes inseparable from spiritual life. We see this in the water deities revered across coastal cultures, from Poseidon's tempers to the Pacific god of the ocean depths. These are not arbitrary inventions. They are personifications of a very real, very powerful force that has both given life and taken it away. Cultural theorist Dr. Maria Tumarkin argues that these places of profound loss, these sunken worlds, do not simply vanish from the human heart. Instead, they become potent sites of meaning, A coastline that was once home transforms in the collective imagination into a sacred, underwater realm, a place to be honored and feared. Rituals performed at the water's edge, offerings cast into the waves, these are acts of memorialization, a way of speaking to the ghosts of a landscape. This emotional and psychological dimension adds a crucial layer to the scientific study of submerged cities. A sediment core can tell us when the sea rose, but only the human stories can tell us how it felt to watch it happen, and how that feeling echoed for 1,000 years. This deep, personal connection to a lost past inevitably raises complex questions of ownership and responsibility, moving our inquiry from the realm of memory into the arena of lore. Who truly owns a city that sleeps beneath the waves? As our technology for discovery has advanced, so too has the urgent need to protect these fragile time capsules from looting and destruction. This is where international law steps in, creating a fragile shield for our sunken past. The 2001 UNESCO Convention on the Protection of the Underwater Cultural Heritage stands as a global framework, a set of rules agreed upon by nations to treat these sites not as treasure troves, but as invaluable pages from our collective history. It establishes that heritage in international waters should be preserved in place as a first option, and that any recovery must be for the benefit of humanity, not private gain. This directly counters the legacy of commercial salvagers who for decades have ripped artifacts from their context, selling priceless history piece by piece and erasing the stories they held. The convention tackles complex jurisdictional issues, providing a cooperative path for nations when a sunken ship or city lies beyond any single country's territorial waters. On a national level, countries like Greece and Egypt have pioneered the creation of underwater archaeological parks. At sites like the sunken city of Epidaurus in Greece or the submerged ruins of Alexandria's ancient port, they have created managed zones. Here, the public can visit and witness history firsthand, but strict regulations protect the sites from anchor damage, souvenir hunting, and unregulated diving. This delicate balance allows for education and wonder, while ensuring preservation remains the top priority. Legal scholar Dr. Sarah Dromgoole argues that a law is only as strong as the will to enforce it. She stresses that effective protection requires a three-part foundation: robust international collaboration, resources for monitoring and enforcement, and a well-informed public that understands the value of what lies beneath. When local communities and tourists appreciate that a shard of pottery is part of a story, not just a souvenir, they become the first line of defense against looters. These legal and ethical frameworks are a profound acknowledgement that the ghost cities under the sea do not belong to one nation, but to all of us. They represent a collective decision to learn from the past, not plunder it. By upholding these standards, we make a promise to those lost civilizations and to our own descendants that their legacy will be treated with the reverence it deserves. This global effort to guard our sunken heritage raises a final, inevitable question. As our own coastlines change once more, what will we choose to preserve from the world we are building today? The North Sea holds a secret that emerges only at the lowest of tides. On the mudflats of Germany's Wadden Sea, the ghost of a town named Rungholt appears. When the water pulls back, it reveals the faint outlines of streets, the foundations of houses, and the remnants of a dike that failed catastrophically more than 600 years ago. This was not a slow drowning but a single night of terror. In 1362, a colossal storm surge, a tempest so violent it was named the Groot Mandrink, or the Great Drowning of Men, slammed into the coast. The seawalls, overwhelmed by the fury of the wind and waves, shattered. the water poured in, swallowing Rungholt and dozens of other villages in a matter of hours. An estimated 25,000 people perished, their communities erased from the map as if they had never existed. For centuries, Rungholt lived on only in local folklore, a cautionary tale of a wealthy but sinful town punished by the sea. Fishermen told stories of hearing church bells ringing from beneath the waves on stormy nights. The legend was so persistent that many believed it was pure myth until the mud began to give up its secrets. Archaeologists now know that Rungholt was a real and prosperous trading hub, part of a thriving maritime culture that managed a complex system of dikes and canals on the vulnerable coastal marshes. Excavations during rare low-tide windows have uncovered incredible finds: wooden sluice gates that controlled water flow, bronze cauldrons, fine imported pottery, and the bones of its residents, all preserved in the anaerobic mud that sealed their fate. These are not scattered artifacts, but the intact remains of daily life, frozen at the moment the town died. Historian Dr. Simon Haslett places this disaster squarely within the context of the Little Ice Age, a period of climatic cooling that brought more frequent and intense North Sea storms. The people of Rungholt were not ignorant of the risks. They had built extensive dike networks, but they were living on a front line, their land already slowly subsiding while the sea was gradually rising. The Great Storm of 1362 was the hammer blow that their fragile defenses could not withstand. It was a perfect storm of environmental factors, climate change intensifying weather patterns, coupled with a long-term rise in sea level that made their homeland profoundly vulnerable. The story of Rungholt is a powerful microcosm, a single, stark example of a pattern that has repeated itself for millennia. A community, confident in its technology and its prosperity, is suddenly and utterly undone by the forces of nature it believed it could control. This medieval tragedy on the German coast forces a hauntingly familiar question: how many of our own modern coastal cities are living with that same fragile confidence, built on lands that are sinking as the waters are rising? The search for our lost shores is accelerating into a new era of discovery. With every technological leap, our vision into the deep grows sharper, turning vast, dark stretches of ocean floor into a new frontier for exploration. As the Arctic ice retreats at an unprecedented rate, it is not just revealing open water, but potentially exposing the frozen remains of ancient human settlements. These sites, preserved for millennia in the permafrost, could offer an unparalleled window into the lives of some of the most resilient early humans, those who thrived along now vanished Ice Age coastlines. This is not a distant dream but an imminent reality as archaeologists prepare to survey these newly accessible zones. At the same time, the search is becoming a global, collaborative effort. Online platforms now allow anyone with an internet connection to scrutinize satellite imagery, searching for the telltale geometric shapes of walls or the faint, ghostly outlines of submerged riverbeds. This crowdsourcing model harnesses the power of millions of eyes, democratizing discovery and allowing a school teacher or a taxi driver to help locate a city that has been lost for thousands of years. The future of this field lies in synthesis, in connecting these scattered dots across the globe. Artificial intelligence is being trained to sift through mountains of oceanographic data, from sonar scans to sediment chemistry, identifying subtle patterns that might escape a human researcher. These algorithms could one day reveal a hidden trade route by linking pottery styles from a shipwreck in the Mediterranean to a submerged port in India, or trace the genetic journey of a population displaced by rising seas across continents. Pioneering marine archaeologist Dr. James Delgado often remarks that we have surveyed less than 1% of the world's ocean floor with the detail needed to find these sites. He believes we are standing at the shore of a vast unknown, that for every Dwarka or Pavlov we have found, there are thousands more waiting in the silence. This is not a field running out of questions, but one that is only just beginning to ask them. The next generation of robotic explorers will venture into the crushing pressures of deep sea trenches and the labyrinthine caves of submerged karst landscapes, places we once thought were inaccessible. Each of these missions requires significant investment and international cooperation, a testament to the growing recognition that our past is a vital resource for navigating our future. The enduring mystery of these lost worlds ensures that the map of human history is never truly finished. It is constantly being redrawn, not with ink, but with sound waves and laser light, revealing with each new discovery that the story of humanity is, and has always been, a story written at the water's edge. Our sense of self is often anchored to the land we call home. For countless communities living on islands and along coasts, the shoreline is not a simple line on a map, it is the very heart of their cultural identity. When that shoreline shifts or vanishes, it does more than erase physical space. It unravels the fabric of daily life, threatening languages, traditions, and a people's understanding of their own place in the world. We see this profound connection playing out in real time across the Pacific Islands, where rising sea levels are not a future threat but a present reality. The saltwater that seeps into taro patches is not just killing a crop, it is poisoning a centuries-old way of life. The erosion that claims a village meeting house is washing away a physical anchor for community memory and storytelling. In response, these communities are engaged in a painful but remarkable process of redefinition. They are adapting their ancestral knowledge, finding new ways to farm, to build, and to honor their past even as their physical world transforms. This incredible adaptability is a testament to human resilience, a quality noted by anthropologists who study how cultures survive catastrophe. Yet this resilience is forged in grief. There is a deep, palpable sorrow for the loss of ancestral lands, for the sacred sites submerged, for the familiar contours of a home that is literally melting away. This creates a powerful tension, a constant negotiation between honoring the past and building a viable future. The Fijian writer and scholar Dr. Epeli Hauofa offered a transformative perspective on this challenge. He argued that for oceanic peoples, the sea has never been a barrier. It is a vast connecting highway, a source of life and identity. This worldview, this sense of a sea of islands, reframes the crisis. It suggests that identity is not fixed to a single, static piece of land, but is fluid and expansive, rooted in kinship and shared history across the ocean itself. This is not about abandoning a drowning homeland, but about carrying its essence forward, redefining what it means to belong. This deep, intrinsic bond shows us that coastlines are far more than geological features. They are living narratives woven into our songs, our ceremonies, and our sense of who we are. When we understand this, the ancient stories of sunken cities like Dwarka or the drowned plains of Doggerland take on a new, deeply human dimension. We are no longer just studying lost geography. We are witnessing the echoes of a universal experience, the enduring struggle to hold onto identity when the very ground beneath your feet dissolves into the sea. No single field of study holds all the answers to these drowned worlds. The true picture only emerges when we weave together threads from many different disciplines, creating a tapestry of understanding far richer than any single thread could provide. Consider the immense sunken subcontinent of Sundaland. Geologists can map its drowned river valleys using sonar, while climate scientists model the precise pace at which the sea rose. But to understand the human story, we must turn to geneticists. By analyzing the DNA of modern populations across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, they can trace ancient migration routes back to a time when those routes were dry land. This genetic trail acts like a breadcrumb path, showing how people were pushed outward by the encroaching waters. At the same time, linguists study the family tree of the Austronesian languages, finding that the oldest roots and the greatest diversity are in the Taiwan region, a finding that supports the model of a great dispersal from the flooded southern shores. These separate lines of evidence do not just run in parallel, they intersect and reinforce one another, turning a theoretical migration into a documented human saga. This collaborative spirit is the cornerstone of modern research. At institutions like the University of Southampton's Centre for Maritime Archaeology, historians work alongside oceanographers, and computer modelers share data with specialists in ancient pottery. This creates a feedback loop of discovery. An archaeologist might find a peculiar type of fishing weight at a submerged site. A historian then finds a description of a similar tool in an ancient text, while a linguist decodes a place name in a local folktale that means the place of the sinking stones, a story told about a now flooded bay. Suddenly, a simple artifact is no longer just a tool. It is a key that unlocks a cultural memory, confirming the location of a lost fishing ground and the technology its people used. This holistic approach forces us to stop seeing these lost civilizations as isolated cases. We begin to see them as part of a vast, interconnected web, where a volcanic eruption in the Mediterranean could trigger a climate shock that affected monsoon patterns in Asia, which in turn influenced the sea level rise that drowned a port city thousands of miles away. By breaking down the walls between geology, archaeology, and history, we do more than just solve puzzles. We learn to see the profound, dynamic connections between human societies and the shifting ground beneath their feet, a lesson that has never been more vital. The shorelines we have walked are a fleeting signature in the sand. Throughout this journey, we have witnessed how these shifting borders have acted as silent erasers of entire civilizations, from the legendary spires of Dwarka to the drowned hunting grounds of Doggerland, from the sudden ruin of Helike to the slow fragmentation of Sundaland. Each story, unique in its details, echoes a universal truth that the ground beneath our feet is not a permanent stage but a dynamic, ever-changing canvas. Human monuments, no matter how grand, are temporary guests in the face of planetary forces that operate on a scale far beyond our own. Yet, within every tale of loss lies a parallel narrative of incredible human resilience. These were not passive victims, they were survivors who carried their languages, their technologies, and their stories to new lands, seeding the cultures that would follow. Their enduring legacy is not one of defeat, but of adaptation. As we now face our own era of climate change and rising seas, these ancient voices from the deep offer more than just a warning, they provide a crucial playbook. They urge us to protect our vulnerable coastal heritage with wisdom and to build our future settlements with a humility that acknowledges the power of the natural world. Let this exploration change the way you see the world. The next time you stand at the water's edge, look out at the horizon and ponder the secrets that the waves keep. What forgotten stories lie hidden just beyond your sight? We would love to hear which of these lost civilizations captures your imagination most. Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to join us on our next deep dive into history's greatest mysteries. Remember, the past is not truly gone. It is simply waiting, preserved in the silent, sunken dark for the curious to rediscover.